The lens does not blink. It records the exact millisecond when a human life shatters against the immutable laws of physics. For these 6 individuals, the broadcast wasn't a performance. It was a countdown to a biological or mechanical failure that no one saw coming until it was too late. This is a clinical observation of tragedy. Do not attempt to replicate these actions. Reality has no replay. On the evening of October 31st, 1990, the Black Cat Fun Farm in Fresno, California, was filled with the smell of damp earth and the heavy exhaust of a diesel engine. Under the flickering glow of portable floodlights and the sharp glare of local news cameras, a crowd of 150 people gathered to witness a spectacle of life and death. Among them were the 2 young children of the man everyone had come to see. Joseph Burris, a 32-year-old local magician known as Amazing Joe, stood in the center of the muddy lot wearing a formal black tuxedo. Joe was not a man of casual tricks. He was a man possessed by the legend of Harry Houdini. He believed that to become a legend, he had to conquer the most terrifying fear of all, being buried alive. This was his big moment, a stunt he hoped would launch him into national stardom. The plan was simple and brutal. Joe would be handcuffed, locked inside a custom-made casket, and lowered into a 7-foot deep pit. Then 7 tons of dirt and wet concrete would be poured directly on top of him. Joe was confident because he had performed a similar escape the year before, using only dry dirt. However, this confidence was a fatal mistake born from a lack of basic engineering knowledge. Joe was an artist, not a scientist, and he failed to understand the difference between weight and pressure. Dry soil is a solid that stacks and creates internal friction, but wet concrete is a heavy, viscous liquid. It does not just sit on top of an object, it exerts what is called hydrostatic pressure. This means it pushes with equal crushing force from every single side at once. The deeper the concrete, the more weight it puts on every square inch of the surface. Joe's casket was a homemade hybrid of thin wood and plexiglass. It was designed to look good for the cameras, allowing the viewers to see him inside, but it was never tested for structural load capacity. As Joe climbed into the clear box and the lid was bolted shut, the news anchors spoke in hushed, dramatic tones for the live broadcast. The first few feet of dry dirt were shoveled in, creating a hollow, rhythmic thudding sound against the plastic walls. Then, the cement truck moved into position. The metal chute extended with a screech of grinding gears, and a thick, gray slurry began to slide down into the hole. To the crowd, it looked like a standard construction project. But for Joe, the world was becoming a nightmare of sound and vibration. The weight was immense. Wet concrete weighs about 150 pounds per cubic foot, nearly double that of dry earth. As the pit filled, the pressure on the plexiglass lid grew to thousands of pounds. This is the moment of time dilation where seconds feel like hours. Inside the box, the air was cold and thin. Joe was trapped in a tiny pocket of space, separated from a violent death by only an inch of plastic. Suddenly, something happened that the crowd did not expect. The surface of the wet concrete in the pit abruptly dropped by over a foot. It looked as if the earth had simply swallowed a portion of the gray sludge. Thinking this was a part of the illusion, the audience began to cheer and clap. They believed Joe had triggered a secret trapdoor or was already making his way out of the ground through a hidden tunnel. In reality, they were cheering at the exact moment of a catastrophic structural failure. At a depth of several feet, the pressure of the concrete finally exceeded the strength of the casket. The plexiglass did not just crack, it experienced an instantaneous total implosion. The walls were forced inward with the power of a hydraulic press, instantly removing all the air from the chamber. At this point, the story shifts from a magic show to a forensic report. Joseph Burris suffered immediate and fatal blunt force trauma as the heavy debris and liquid concrete crushed his body. His internal systems failed instantly due to the massive external force. leading to a total cessation of vital functions. There was no room to move and no air to scream. The physics of the earth had simply reclaimed the space Joe had tried to occupy. The cheering died down as the minutes passed and Joe did not emerge. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The rescue crew began to dig frantically, their shovels clinking against the hardening gray mud in the dark. It took over an hour of back-breaking labor to reach the bottom. When they finally broke through, they didn't find a magician. They found a shattered box filled with jagged plastic, gray grit, and a man in a ruined tuxedo. The news cameras never stopped rolling, capturing the frantic faces of the rescuers and the pale, silent shock of the audience. The cement truck stood idle nearby, a giant of steel and iron that had unknowingly acted as the executioner. The final artifact of the night was a pair of metal handcuffs, still locked around the victim's wrists, serving as a reminder that the laws of physics are the only chains that can never be broken by a trick. Joseph Burris wanted to be remembered like Houdini, but he ended his life as a lesson in the cold, unyielding weight of reality. On the night of April 15, 1984, the atmosphere inside Her Majesty's Theatre in London was heavy with the scent of old velvet and the sharp ozone smell of hot television cameras. 12 million people across the United Kingdom were sitting in their living rooms, staring at their screens in anticipation. This was a live variety show called Live from Her Majesty's, and the biggest star in the country was about to take the stage. That man was Tommy Cooper. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and wearing his iconic red fez, Tommy was a giant of comedy. He had spent 30 years perfecting a character, the world's worst magician. His entire act was built on the foundation of failure. He fumbled his props and looked confused when his tricks did not work. Because of this, the audience was conditioned to laugh at his every mistake. They did not see a man struggling. They saw a genius performing a routine of incompetence. This created a situation where the viewers felt entertained, even as the man in front of them began to experience a total physical collapse. Tommy was 63 years old. He was a heavy smoker, whose body was under immense internal strain. As he stood before the gold curtain, he began a sketch involving a large cloak. He was supposed to be assisted by a woman, but as the music played, his movements changed. His body became stiff. His knees began to buckle in a rhythmic, mechanical way that looked like a comedic fall. He slowly slid down the curtain, his large frame sinking toward the wooden floor with a heavy thud. The crowd reacted instantly with a massive roar of laughter. They thought this was his best joke. They believed he was pretending to die as part of the act. In this moment, the comedy show and the reality of biology collided. While the audience was cheering, Tommy was suffering a massive myocardial infarction. Inside his chest, a major coronary artery had become completely obstructed by a blockage. This triggered an acute cardiac arrest. The electrical signals in his heart turned into a chaotic rhythm known as ventricular fibrillation. His heart was no longer pumping oxygenated blood to his brain. It was merely quivering. This was the moment where his personality was replaced by failing biological processes. As his brain was starved of oxygen, his muscles went limp and his eyes became fixed. To the cameras, he looked like he was just waiting for the next punchline. To the medical world, his body had already reached a point of no return. The laughter continued for nearly a full minute. The sound of thousands of people clapping for a man in his final agony filled the room. It was a moment of total isolation in the middle of a crowd. The producer finally realized the timing was wrong. Tommy had been on the floor for too long. He was not moving. He was not breathing. The music from the orchestra suddenly grew louder, a desperate attempt to cover the silence. The director made a split-second decision to cut to a commercial break. Millions of viewers were suddenly staring at advertisements, unaware that they had just watched a man's life end in real time. Behind the curtains, the scene was chaotic. Paramedics rushed onto the stage and began an immediate attempt at resuscitation. They used a defibrillator to send high-voltage electrical shocks through his chest, trying to restart his heart, but the damage to the muscle was too severe. The laws of biology are indifferent to fame or the joy of the audience. Tommy Cooper was officially pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital, but his story had actually ended under the heat of the stage lights. The show continued that night with other acts, but the air in the theater had changed. The world of television was forced to face the reality that entertainment can blind us to a tragedy happening right in front of our eyes. The final artifact was the red fez, found lying alone on the dark stage after the cameras were turned off. It was a simple piece of red felt that symbolized the thin line between a comedy bit and a fatal injury. The laws of physics and biology do not pause for applause. They are cold, constant, and unyielding. This was the final laugh of Tommy Cooper, a man who died while the whole world was laughing at the very thing that was killing him. It remains a chilling example of how our own expectations can hide the most tragic truths of the physical world. The silence that followed his death was the only thing louder than the laughter that preceded it. On the stage of existence, the final curtain can fall even when the audience is still clapping for an encore. This was not a trick. It was the inevitable end of a human system reaching its limit. It is the early morning of January 12, 2003, in a quiet bedroom in Phoenix, Arizona. The only light comes from the flickering blue glow of a bulky CRT monitor, casting long, jittery shadows against the walls. The air is stagnant, smelling of stale coffee, electronic dust, and the faint metallic tang of overcharged cooling fans. In front of the screen sits 21-year-old Brandon Vedas, known to the online world by his handle, Ripper. Brandon is a child of the early internet era, a time when anonymous chat rooms felt like a second home, and digital approval felt as real as oxygen. On this night, he is logged into an IRC channel called Shroomery, a digital gathering place for people interested in testing the limits of the human mind. Brandon is not looking for a conversation. He is looking for status. He wants to prove he is hardcore, a term used in these communities to describe someone who can push their biological limits further than anyone else. To do this, he starts a webcam stream. It is a primitive, grainy broadcast, but it captures his every move for a global audience of strangers. He begins a reckless demonstration of chemical tolerance, laying out an array of prescription pharmaceutical compounds on his desk. This is the beginning of a fatal collision between human ego and the hard laws of pharmacology. Brandon believes that because he feels in control, his internal organs will obey his will. He begins to administer a complex combination of pharmaceutical compounds, ignoring the warnings on the labels and the biological safety limits of his body. In the chat room, the reaction is immediate. This is a digital coliseum where the spectators hold all the power. While a few voices urge him to stop, many others provide a chorus of encouragement. They dare him to take more. They mock his hesitation. They fuel his need to perform. Each cheer from the chat triggers a hit of dopamine in Brandon's brain, blinding him to the growing toxicity in his bloodstream. This is the moment where his subjective need for social status overrides the objective reality of human biology. As the minutes pass, the chemical synergy of the drugs begins to take hold. In simple terms, different substances can amplify each other's effects. This is a dangerous math, where 1 + 1 does not equal 2, but 10. The sedatives begin to slow his central nervous system, muting the electrical signals that tell his heart to beat and his lungs to expand. Time begins to dilate for the viewers. They watch as Brandon's speech becomes slurred. His movements grow heavy and uncoordinated. He stares into the camera and types his final message into the chat. "I told you I was hardcore." These words are the last breath of his digital persona before the biological reality takes over. The forensic zoom into his body reveals a system in total collapse. The high concentration of substances in his blood, has led to severe respiratory depression. This is a fatal injury to the brain's control center. His breathing becomes shallow and irregular. This is a condition where the brain simply forgets to tell the body to inhale. Eventually, his breathing stops entirely. This is a state of acute hypoxia, where the brain and heart are starved of oxygen. Brandon slumps over his desk, his head resting near the keyboard. The chat room, once full of noise, enters a state of confusion. Some users continue to joke, while others realize that the figure on their screens is no longer moving. Because of the anonymity of the internet in 2003, no one knows his real address. For hours, the webcam continues to broadcast the image of a silent, darkened room and the motionless body of a young man. The only sound is the persistent mechanical hum of the computer. The world continues to turn outside his window, but inside, his biological processes have reached a permanent cessation. It is not until his mother enters the room later that morning that the broadcast finally ends. The rescue services arrive to find a room filled with the artifacts of a life cut short. Empty pill bottles, a glowing monitor, and a blinking cursor on an IRC window. This event stands as a chilling milestone in the history of the internet. It was one of the first times a global audience watched a human life vanish in real time. It was not a failure of technology, but a failure of the human instinct for self-preservation. The final artifact is the log of the chat room, a digital record of a man who traded his life for a moment of status among people he had never met. The laws of chemistry are indifferent to the cheers of a crowd. They follow a strict, mathematical path to the end. This was the silent digital shutdown of Brandon Vedas, a tragedy that revealed the cold, dark side of the connected world. The screen eventually went black, but the lesson remained. The body has limits that the ego cannot ignore. It is the overcast afternoon of September 29th, 1985, in the heart of downtown Seattle, Washington. A crowd of over 2,000 people has gathered at the base of the Mutual Life building, their faces tilted upward toward the gray Pacific Northwest sky. The air is cool and damp, carrying the salty scent of the Puget Sound mixed with the faint smell of city exhaust. High above the asphalt, 4 men are suspended from the roof of the brick skyscraper. They are members of the world-famous Japanese dance group Sankai Juku. They practice an art form called Buto, or the Dance of Darkness, which is known for its slow, haunting movements. Among them is 31-year-old Yoshiyuki Takada. His entire body is shaved and coated in a thick layer of white clay, making him look like a living ghost or a marble statue caught between two worlds. He is performing a piece titled The Dance of Birth and Death, a name that is about to become a terrifying reality. In this moment, Takada is the image of perfect artistic control. He is suspended 80 feet in the air, hanging completely upside down by a single strand of 3/4-inch manila rope tied around his ankles. The crowd below is in a state of total silence, hypnotized by the eerie grace of the dancers against the background of the industrial city. Local news cameras are rolling, broadcasting the performance live to thousands of viewers at home. The world seems to have stopped, focused entirely on the white figure swaying in the wind. But behind this beautiful image lies the cold reality of mechanical physics. The manila rope is a natural fiber, and every natural fiber has a breaking point. It is subject to the laws of tension, friction, and structural fatigue. This rope has been used in many previous shows, and every time it was stressed, microscopic fractures occurred deep within its core. As Takada begins to slowly sway, his body creates what engineers call a dynamic load. This is much heavier than his actual weight because the movement adds force to the line. The physics of the situation are simple and unforgiving. The tension on the rope increases with every movement, reaching a critical threshold where the dry fibers can no longer hold the weight. Suddenly, a sharp, dry crack echoes through the streets. It sounds like a gunshot against the brick walls. The rope has snapped. The news cameras capture the exact second the connection to the roof is severed. This is the moment of time dilation. For the spectators on the ground, the fall takes less than 3 seconds, but the sight of the white-painted man falling through the air feels like an eternity. Takata falls through 80 feet of empty space, his body turning slowly as gravity takes absolute command. There's no safety net and no backup line. At this height, the human body reaches a speed that makes any impact with a hard surface impossible to survive. The narrative now shifts to the analytical facts. As Takata strikes the concrete pavement, he experiences catastrophic deceleration trauma. This is a process where the kinetic energy of the 80-foot fall is instantly transferred into the biological structure of the body. The impact results in massive blunt force trauma and extensive skeletal disruption. There is an immediate and total cessation of all vital functions. The death is instantaneous, occurring at the moment of contact before the brain can even register the sensation of pain. The forensic reality is a total collapse of the internal systems under the weight of the external world. The crowd, which had been silent in awe, now falls into a terrifying, heavy silence of shock. The only sound is the distant hum of city traffic and the soft clicking of cameras that continue to record the scene. The white clay from Takata's skin is visible against the dark asphalt, marking the exact point of impact, leaving a silent mark where the performance ended. The other 3 dancers remain hanging above, frozen in horror, their own ropes still holding by mere chance. The news broadcast continues to roll, but the anchors have lost their words. The artifact of this tragedy is the frayed end of the manila rope, still dangling from the roof like a broken cord. It is a reminder that even the most profound human art must exist within the rigid boundaries of physical materials. Following this event, the city of Seattle and performance groups worldwide implemented much stricter safety rules for high-altitude shows. The Mutual Life building stands to this day, but the memory of the white figure falling toward the earth remains part of the city's history. The laws of gravity do not care about the beauty of a dance or the fame of an artist. They only recognize the breaking point of a fiber and the weight of a falling object. This was the moment where the poetry of the dance met the hard mathematics of the pavement. The show was over, and the laws of physics had the final word. The silence that followed was a reminder that in a collision between art and gravity, gravity never loses. It is the humid morning of April 20th, 2008, in the coastal town of Paranagua, Brazil. The air is filled with the rhythmic, rubbery squeaking of 1,000 colorful latex balloons and the salty tang of the South Atlantic breeze. This is the starting point for a journey that was designed to be a beautiful spectacle of faith and charity. Standing in the center of this vibrant floating canopy is 41-year-old Father Adelier Antonio de Carli, a Catholic priest with a mission to raise money for a rest stop for truck drivers. He plans to break a world record for the longest flight using party balloons, a chair, and a parachute. He is an experienced skydiver, which gives him a sense of confidence, but today he is moving into a realm governed by forces far beyond his control. He is equipped with a thermal flight suit, a satellite phone, and a high-tech GPS device. This is the peak of his subjective world, a moment of high spirits where he feels completely prepared for the heavens. But hidden within this plan is a fatal technical error that the cameras cannot see. Father Adelier has the equipment, but he has never mastered the interface of his GPS. He is an amateur navigator entering a professional environment. As he releases the weights and lifts off into the sky, the crowd erupts in cheers. The local news captures the image of a man floating upward toward the sun like a scene from a fairy tale. For a few hours, the dream remains intact. He reaches an altitude of nearly 20,000 feet, floating through thin, freezing air. He uses his satellite phone to call ground crews and local radio stations, broadcasting his progress live to the public. He describes the beauty of the clouds and the blue horizon. But then, the objective laws of nature intervene. A sudden shift in the wind begins to push the massive cluster of balloons away from the land. He is being dragged out over the vast, cold expanse of the ocean. This is the moment of convergence, where his lack of technical knowledge becomes a death sentence. In his recorded calls to emergency services, his voice remains calm, but the situation is desperate. He admits to the dispatchers that he does not know how to read the coordinates on his GPS. He is literally holding the key to his survival in his hands, but he cannot unlock the data to tell the rescuers where to find him. To make matters worse, his phone battery is dying. The wind accelerates, pulling him further from the coast as the sun begins to set. The physics of the flight now take over with brutal precision. As the air cools, at night the helium inside the balloons contracts, reducing their lifting force. The priest begins a slow, irreversible descent toward the dark water below. The narrative now shifts to a clinical analysis of the biological consequence. When Father Adelier finally impacts the ocean, his body is subjected to a massive thermal shock. The water temperature in the South Atlantic is cold enough to trigger a rapid drop in core body temperature, leading to a state of severe hypothermia. As the body enters this state, the nervous system begins to fail. The blood vessels in the extremities constrict to protect the vital organs. But eventually, the heart can no longer maintain a steady rhythm. The final cause of death is a fatal cardiac event triggered by cold water immersion and physical exhaustion. There is no struggle against the waves. The biological system simply shuts down as its heat energy is drained by the sea. The search for the priest lasts for weeks, involving the Brazilian Navy and specialized aircraft. For a long time, the only evidence of his journey is a few clusters of colorful balloons found floating on the surface of the sea like empty shells. It isn't until months later that an offshore oil rig discovers his remains hundreds of miles away from his launch point. The world immediately after the event is one of silent reflection on the dangers of overconfidence. The artifact of this tragedy is the priest's thermal suit, recovered from the water as a symbol of a man who is physically protected but technically lost. This story remains a haunting example of how even the most noble intentions can be crushed by a single point of failure in preparation. The wind and the sea do not recognize the sanctity of a mission or the bravery of a man. They only recognize the path of least resistance and the cold reality of a declining temperature. Father Adelier wanted to reach the sky to help the people on the ground, but he forgot that the sky is a place of physics, not just spirit. The silence of the ocean was the final answer to his call for help, proving that in the wilderness of the elements, a tool is only as good as the knowledge of the person using it. His flight ended in the dark, far from the cameras and the cheers, leaving only a trail of latex and a lesson in the unyielding nature of the physical world. Nature did not move for him. He was simply moved by nature until his clock ran out. It is the bright, sweltering afternoon of June 22nd, 2013. At the Dayton International Airport in Ohio, the air is thick with the scent of high-octane aviation fuel and the savory, oily smell of concession stand popcorn. Thousands of spectators have gathered for the Dayton Air Show, their eyes shielded by sunglasses as they track a small, brightly colored biplane dancing against the vast blue sky. This is the stage for 44-year-old Jane Wicker, one of the most respected wing walkers in the world. Jane is not just a performer. She is an athlete who treats the wings of an airplane like a high-altitude balance beam. She is currently positioned on a 1940s-era Boeing Stearman, a rugged machine of steel and fabric, known for its deep, rhythmic radial engine roar. This is the peak of the human world, where bravery and skill seem to defy the very laws of nature. Jane is sitting on the bottom wing of the aircraft, while the pilot, Charlie Schwenker, rolls the plane into an inverted position. From the perspective of the crowd, she's now sitting on top of the world, dangling gracefully over the grass, while the plane flies upside down just a few hundred feet above the runway. In this moment, the air feels like a solid floor beneath the wings. To maintain flight while upside down, an aircraft must maintain a specific speed so that air continues to flow over the wings to create lift. However, a biplane is a heavy, high-drag machine. Flying it upside down at such a low altitude leaves zero room for even a minor mistake. This is where the hidden danger lies. As the plane levels out for its final pass, the speed begins to drop. The air can no longer follow the curve of the wing. This is a physical event called an aerodynamic stall. When a stall happens, the lift vanishes instantly, and the aircraft becomes a falling stone. As the plane begins to wobble, the nose drops toward the ground. The crowd watches in a state of excitement, many of them still smiling and pointing, believing the low dip of the plane is a dramatic part of the show. But the local news cameras, broadcasting the event live to thousands of people at home, capture a different reality. The left wing suddenly dips toward the grass, losing its final bit of support. Time seems to slow down as the plane enters an unrecoverable roll. For a split second, the engine screams with full power as the pilot tries to pull up, but the physics of gravity and momentum are already decided. At a speed of nearly 80 miles per hour, the wingtip clips the soft grass of the airfield. The kinetic energy of the nearly 3,000-pound aircraft is instantly converted into a violent spinning force. The plane does not just crash, it undergoes a total and immediate structural disintegration. The narrative now shifts to the clinical facts of the impact. As the structural frame of the aircraft strikes the ground, the occupants are subjected to a massive and catastrophic deceleration. This results in extreme blunt force trauma to all major internal systems. The energy transfer is so powerful that it causes an instantaneous and total cessation of all vital functions. There is no struggle and no awareness of the event. The medical reality is a non-survivable injury caused by the sudden stop of a high-mass object. The roar of the engine is replaced by the soft, crackling sound of broken wood and the hiss of escaping fluids. A plume of white smoke and dust rises from the wreckage, which is now scattered across the green grass like a broken toy. The announcer's voice, which had been full of joy, suddenly drops into a whisper, telling the parents in the crowd to turn their children away. The news broadcast continues to roll, but the anchors have lost their words. The artifact of this tragedy is a piece of the multicolored wing fabric, fluttering in the wind next to the silent bent propeller. In the aftermath, the aviation community implemented even stricter rules for low-level maneuvers and to prevent such a collision with the Earth. The world immediately after the crash is one of frozen shock, a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere of just seconds before. This was the moment where the elegance of flight met the unyielding reality of the ground. The laws of physics do not recognize the grace of a performer or the years of training of a pilot. They only recognize the velocity of a fall and the mechanical limits of a machine. Jane Wicker died as she lived, in the thin space between the clouds and the Earth, proving that when the air stops supporting the wing, gravity will always have the final word. The silence on the airfield was the only sound left, a haunting end to a routine that was supposed to finish with a bow, but ended with the cold, hard mathematics of the pavement. Nature did not blink. It simply followed the path of gravity until the movement stopped. You watch these fates to feel safe, convinced you'd spot the danger. But ask yourself, if you were in that crowd, would you have cheered for the dying man, or would you have been the only one to see the truth? Don't lie. Most of you are just here for the crash. If you're honest enough to admit why you're still watching, prove it in the comments. Subscribe if you value reality over illusions.